Question 1. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing robust data privacy measures and ensuring absolute accuracy in product descriptions might initially increase operational costs for an Alabama-based online retailer. However, the potential for significant legal penalties and reputational damage from noncompliance is substantial. Considering the legal landscape in Alabama, which of the following strategies best mitigates these risks while fostering long-term business viability? Option A. Proactively review and update all product descriptions for accuracy and clarity, and implement a comprehensive, easily accessible privacy policy that clearly outlines data collection, usage, and storage practices, obtaining explicit consent for data processing where appropriate. Option B. Address product description accuracy only when formal complaints are received, and implement a privacy policy that is only updated when explicitly required by new, narrowly defined Alabama regulations. Option C. Prioritize rapid data collection for marketing campaigns and utilize generic, easily adaptable product descriptions that may not perfectly represent each individual item sold, assuming that minor inaccuracies are common in e-commerce. Option D. Continue using existing product descriptions, assuming consumers understand that marketing language is often aspirational, and collect customer data without a detailed privacy policy or explicit consent, relying on the absence of specific Alabama statutes mandating such practices for all data types. The correct answer is A. Proactively review and update all product descriptions for accuracy and clarity, and implement a comprehensive, easily accessible privacy policy that clearly outlines data collection, usage, and storage practices, obtaining explicit consent for data processing where appropriate. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an Alabama-based e-commerce business due to the evolving landscape of online consumer protection and data privacy. The business must navigate potential liability arising from misleading product descriptions, which can lead to claims of deceptive trade practices under Alabama law, and the implications of collecting and storing customer data without explicit consent, which implicates principles of privacy and fair information practices. Careful judgment is required to balance business growth with legal compliance and ethical consumer relations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively reviewing and updating product descriptions to ensure they are accurate, clear, and not misleading, and implementing a transparent privacy policy that clearly outlines data collection, usage, and storage practices, along with obtaining explicit consent for data processing where required by applicable Alabama consumer protection statutes and general principles of fair dealing. This approach directly addresses potential claims of deceptive trade practices by ensuring truthful advertising and mitigates privacy-related risks by respecting consumer autonomy and data rights. Alabama's Deceptive Trade Practices Act, while broad, aims to prevent unfair or deceptive acts or practices in the conduct of any trade or commerce. Transparency in data handling aligns with ethical business conduct and fosters consumer trust, which is crucial for long-term e-commerce success. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to rely on the assumption that vague or aspirational language in product descriptions is acceptable, and to continue collecting customer data without a clear privacy policy or consent mechanism. This fails to address the core requirements of Alabama's consumer protection laws, which prohibit deceptive representations. It also creates significant legal exposure related to data privacy, as the lack of transparency and consent can lead to claims of unauthorized data use and potential violations of implied consumer rights to privacy. Another incorrect approach is to only address product description accuracy after a complaint is filed, and to implement a privacy policy only when legally mandated by specific, narrowly defined regulations. This reactive stance is insufficient. Waiting for complaints means the business has already engaged in potentially deceptive practices, incurring liability. Furthermore, relying solely on narrowly defined mandates ignores the broader ethical obligations and the potential for future, more comprehensive privacy legislation in Alabama or federal legislation that could apply. A third incorrect approach is to prioritize speed of data collection for marketing purposes over consumer consent, and to use boilerplate product descriptions that may not accurately reflect the specific items being sold. This demonstrates a disregard for consumer rights and a lack of due diligence in product representation. It exposes the business to claims of deceptive advertising and data misuse, undermining consumer trust and potentially leading to significant legal penalties and reputational damage. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a proactive and transparent approach. This involves a continuous cycle of reviewing marketing materials for accuracy and clarity, and regularly updating data privacy policies and consent mechanisms to align with evolving legal standards and ethical best practices. A risk-based assessment should guide decisions, prioritizing consumer protection and data security to build a sustainable and trustworthy e-commerce operation within the Alabama legal framework. Question 2. Quality control measures reveal that a cybersecurity incident originating from a server located in Germany has resulted in the unauthorized access and exfiltration of personal data belonging to residents of Alabama. The affected company, based in Alabama, is now facing potential litigation. The company's legal counsel is considering how to address the international implications of this data breach, particularly concerning any international treaties or agreements that might govern data privacy and cross-border data flows. Which of the following approaches best navigates the jurisdictional and legal complexities for the Alabama-based company? Option A. Assume that any international treaty ratified by the United States automatically dictates the outcome of disputes involving foreign entities and data originating from Alabama, regardless of specific state court interpretations. Option B. Rely solely on general principles of international data privacy law to defend the company's actions, assuming these principles are universally recognized and enforceable in any U.S. state court. Option C. Thoroughly research Alabama statutes and case law for any explicit acknowledgement or incorporation of international data privacy principles or treaties, and then investigate the specific international agreements relevant to the data in question, assessing their scope and potential applicability within Alabama's legal framework. Option D. Focus exclusively on Alabama's domestic cyber law and ignore any potential international treaties or agreements, as the primary legal jurisdiction for the company and the data subjects is Alabama. Correct answer is C. Thoroughly research Alabama statutes and case law for any explicit acknowledgement or incorporation of international data privacy principles or treaties, and then investigate the specific international agreements relevant to the data in question, assessing their scope and potential applicability within Alabama's legal framework. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the intersection of Alabama's domestic cyber law with international data privacy expectations and potential treaty obligations. The core difficulty lies in navigating the ambiguity of how Alabama courts would interpret and apply international agreements concerning data privacy and cross-border data flows when a dispute arises involving a foreign entity and data originating from Alabama. Professionals must exercise careful judgment to ensure compliance with both state law and any applicable international frameworks, avoiding actions that could lead to legal repercussions or reputational damage. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough analysis of Alabama law, specifically looking for any provisions that acknowledge or incorporate international data privacy principles or treaties. This includes researching whether Alabama statutes or case law have established a precedent for considering international agreements in cyber law disputes. If such provisions exist, the professional should then investigate the specific international treaties or agreements that might be relevant to the data in question, considering their scope, ratification by the United States, and any direct or indirect applicability within Alabama. This approach prioritizes understanding the existing legal landscape within Alabama and how it interfaces with international law, ensuring a legally sound and ethically responsible course of action. The justification for this approach lies in adhering to the principle of legal certainty and ensuring that actions taken are grounded in established or reasonably inferable legal authority within the jurisdiction. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely rely on general principles of international data privacy without first confirming their specific applicability or recognition within Alabama's legal framework. This fails to acknowledge that state law, while potentially influenced by international norms, is the primary governing authority, without a clear link between an international treaty and Alabama law. Relying solely on the treaty could lead to a defense that is not recognized by Alabama courts, potentially resulting in a loss of the case or sanctions. Another incorrect approach is to assume that any international agreement ratified by the United States automatically supersedes or dictates the outcome of a dispute solely within Alabama's jurisdiction, without considering how Alabama courts interpret and apply such agreements. This overlooks the nuances of federalism and the specific role of state courts in adjudicating disputes. Alabama courts are bound by Alabama law and their interpretation of federal law and treaties, and a blanket assumption of automatic supersession is legally unsound. A third incorrect approach is to ignore the international dimension entirely and focus only on Alabama's domestic cyber law, assuming that foreign entities are subject only to Alabama's jurisdiction and laws. This is problematic because international treaties and agreements can establish standards for data handling and cross-border transfers that may influence how Alabama courts view the conduct of foreign entities, particularly if those entities have engaged in activities that have a direct impact within Alabama. Ignoring these potential international obligations could lead to a flawed legal strategy and potential violations of international norms that might be considered by a court. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a scenario should adopt a tiered analytical framework. First, they must exhaustively research the specific cyber law and related statutes and case law within Alabama to understand its domestic regulatory environment. Second, they should investigate whether Alabama law explicitly references or incorporates international legal principles or specific treaties related to data privacy or internet law. Third, if such references exist, they must then identify and analyze the relevant international treaties and agreements, assessing their scope, ratification status by the United States, and any established mechanisms for their application within U.S. state courts. This systematic approach ensures that legal strategies are built upon a solid foundation of jurisdictional authority and recognized legal principles, minimizing risk and maximizing the likelihood of a favorable and legally defensible outcome. Question 3. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a significant cyber attack targeting critical infrastructure in Alabama originated from servers located in a foreign country. To prosecute the perpetrators, investigators in Alabama require access to server logs and user data held by a private company operating within that foreign nation. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Alabama investigators to obtain this crucial digital evidence? Option A. Advise the investigators to employ advanced technical means to remotely access and extract the required data from the foreign company's servers without official notification. Option B. Initiate a formal mutual legal assistance treaty, MLAT, request through the appropriate federal agencies of the United States to seek cooperation from the foreign government in obtaining the server logs and user data. Option C. Instruct the Alabama investigators to directly contact the foreign company's IT department and request the data, explaining the urgency of the investigation. Option D. Recommend that the Alabama investigators engage a private cybersecurity firm to travel to the foreign country and attempt to retrieve the data through their own investigative methods. The correct answer is B. Initiate a formal mutual legal assistance treaty, MLAT. Request through the appropriate federal agencies of the United States to seek cooperation from the foreign government in obtaining the server logs and user data. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a cross-border cybercrime investigation where evidence crucial to prosecuting a crime in Alabama is located in a foreign jurisdiction with different legal frameworks and data privacy laws. Navigating these differences requires a delicate balance between achieving justice for victims in Alabama and respecting the sovereignty and legal processes of another nation. Failure to adhere to proper international legal channels can jeopardize the investigation, lead to inadmissible evidence, and potentially create diplomatic friction. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves initiating a formal mutual legal assistance treaty, MLAT, request through the appropriate federal agencies in the United States, acting on behalf of the state of Alabama. This process, governed by international agreements and federal statutes like the International Judicial Assistance Act, ensures that requests for evidence are made through established, legally recognized channels. MLAT provide a framework for cooperation between countries in obtaining evidence for criminal investigations and prosecutions. By utilizing an MLAT, law enforcement in Alabama can formally request assistance from the foreign jurisdiction to obtain the necessary digital evidence, ensuring that the evidence is collected in a manner that will be admissible in Alabama courts and respects the legal procedures of the foreign nation. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and international comity, which are paramount in cross-border investigations. Incorrect approach is analysis. Pursuing direct contact with the foreign company's IT department without going through official channels is professionally unacceptable. This bypasses established legal frameworks for international cooperation, such as MLAT, risks violating the foreign country's data privacy laws, potentially leading to legal repercussions for the investigators, and rendering any obtained evidence inadmissible in Alabama courts due to improper collection methods. Furthermore, it disrespects the sovereignty of the foreign nation and its legal system. Attempting to access the data directly through hacking or exploiting vulnerabilities in the foreign company's systems is illegal and unethical. Such actions would constitute a criminal offense in both Alabama and the foreign jurisdiction, severely compromising the integrity of the investigation and any potential prosecution. This approach disregards fundamental principles of international law and due process. Engaging a private cybersecurity firm to unilaterally retrieve the data from the foreign jurisdiction is also professionally unsound. While private firms may possess technical expertise, they lack the legal authority to operate in a foreign sovereign territory for investigative purposes. Their actions could be construed as espionage or unauthorized access, leading to legal complications and rendering any retrieved evidence inadmissible. This approach fails to respect international legal norms and the jurisdiction of the foreign state. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a scenario should first consult with experienced international legal counsel or federal law enforcement agencies specializing in cybercrime. The decision-making process should prioritize adherence to established international legal frameworks, such as MLAT, to ensure the lawful and ethical acquisition of evidence. This involves understanding the specific legal requirements of both the requesting and the assisting jurisdiction, respecting data privacy laws, and maintaining the integrity of the investigation through legally sound procedures. Question 4. Regulatory review indicates that SwiftPay Alabama, a financial technology company operating within Alabama, has experienced a recent uptick in fraudulent transactions processed through its peer-to-peer payment application. The company is considering several strategies to address this issue. Which of the following approaches best balances fraud prevention with customer experience and regulatory compliance under Alabama law? Option A. Introduce a mandatory, one-time identity verification process for all new users that involves submitting sensitive personal documents via unencrypted email, and then cease all further fraud prevention efforts, believing the initial verification is sufficient. Option B. Rely solely on customer reports of fraud after transactions have been completed and discontinue all proactive fraud monitoring systems to reduce operational costs, assuming that customers will effectively act as the primary line of defense. Option C. Implement a multi-layered fraud detection system that includes real-time transaction monitoring for anomalies, require multi-factor authentication for transactions exceeding a certain risk threshold, and provide clear, easily accessible channels for customers to report suspicious activity, alongside regular employee training on fraud detection and prevention. Option D. Significantly increase the number of transactions flagged for manual review, leading to substantial delays for all users, and implement a policy of immediately blocking any transaction that deviates even slightly from a customer's historical spending patterns without further investigation. The correct answer is C. Implement a multi-layered fraud detection system that includes real-time transaction monitoring for anomalies, require multi-factor authentication for transactions exceeding a certain risk threshold, and provide clear, easily accessible channels for customers to report suspicious activity, alongside regular employee training on fraud detection and prevention. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between facilitating legitimate customer transactions and the imperative to prevent financial fraud, particularly in the context of evolving payment systems. Alabama law, like other jurisdictions, places a significant burden on financial institutions and businesses to implement robust fraud prevention measures, while also ensuring customer privacy and operational efficiency. The rapid pace of technological advancement in payment systems, such as the increasing adoption of peer-to-peer payment apps and digital wallets, creates new avenues for fraudulent activity, requiring constant vigilance and adaptation of security protocols. Balancing these competing demands necessitates careful judgment, a thorough understanding of applicable Alabama statutes and regulations concerning financial transactions and consumer protection, and a commitment to ethical business practices. Correct approach analysis. The approach that represents best professional practice involves a multi-layered strategy that prioritizes proactive identification and mitigation of fraud, while adhering to Alabama's legal framework for consumer protection and data security. This includes implementing advanced fraud detection algorithms that analyze transaction patterns for anomalies, requiring multi-factor authentication for high-risk transactions, and establishing clear, accessible channels for customers to report suspicious activity. Furthermore, it necessitates ongoing employee training on fraud recognition and reporting procedures, and regular review and updating of fraud prevention policies in light of emerging threats and regulatory changes in Alabama. This comprehensive approach aligns with the spirit and letter of Alabama laws designed to safeguard consumers and the integrity of financial systems, such as those related to electronic fund transfers and data breach notification. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves solely relying on post-transaction fraud detection and customer complaints to address fraudulent activity. This reactive stance fails to meet the proactive obligations imposed by Alabama law, which encourages preventative measures. It also risks significant financial losses for both the business and its customers, and can lead to reputational damage and regulatory penalties for failing to implement reasonable safeguards. Another incorrect approach is to implement overly restrictive transaction limits or blanket declines for any transaction exhibiting minor deviations from typical customer behavior, without providing clear explanations or alternative verification methods. While intended to prevent fraud, such an approach can unduly inconvenience legitimate customers, potentially violating consumer protection principles by creating unnecessary barriers to commerce and failing to offer reasonable recourse. This can also lead to customer dissatisfaction and loss of business. A third incorrect approach is to neglect regular updates to fraud prevention systems and employee training, assuming that existing protocols are sufficient. This static approach is highly vulnerable to evolving fraud tactics and technological advancements. Alabama regulations often require businesses to maintain systems that are reasonably designed to protect against foreseeable risks, and a failure to adapt can be seen as negligence, leading to potential legal liability and regulatory scrutiny. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such scenarios should employ a risk-based decision-making framework. This involves first identifying potential fraud risks specific to the payment systems in use and the customer base. Second, they should assess the likelihood and potential impact of these risks. Third, they should evaluate available fraud prevention tools and strategies, considering their effectiveness, cost, and compliance with Alabama laws and regulations. Fourth, they should implement a combination of preventative and detective controls, ensuring clear communication with customers about security measures and reporting procedures. Finally, continuous monitoring, evaluation, and adaptation of these measures are crucial to maintain an effective and compliant fraud prevention program. Question 5. Performance analysis shows a significant increase in data breaches originating from third-party vendors used by an Alabama-based financial services firm. What is the most prudent course of action for the firm to mitigate future risks and ensure compliance with Alabama's data protection expectations? Option A. Develop and implement a comprehensive vendor risk management program that includes rigorous due diligence, strong contractual security requirements, and ongoing monitoring of vendor compliance. Option B. Accept vendors' self-reported compliance with security standards without independent verification, assuming their assurances are sufficient. Option C. Focus on improving the firm's internal security measures and wait to address vendor-related issues only if a breach occurs. Option D. Utilize generic vendor contracts that do not specifically address the types of sensitive financial data the vendors will access or the associated risks. The correct answer is A. Develop and implement a comprehensive vendor risk management program that includes rigorous due diligence, strong contractual security requirements, and ongoing monitoring of vendor compliance. Explanation. Performance analysis shows a significant increase in data breaches originating from third-party vendors used by an Alabama-based financial services firm. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves managing risks that extend beyond the firm's direct control, requiring a proactive and comprehensive approach to vendor due diligence and ongoing monitoring. The firm must balance the need for efficient operations with the imperative to protect sensitive customer data, adhering to Alabama's specific data privacy and security regulations. The best professional approach involves implementing a robust vendor risk management program that includes stringent contractual clauses mandating specific security standards, regular audits, and clear breach notification protocols. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the identified vulnerabilities by establishing a framework for accountability and oversight of third-party data handling. Alabama law, while not a single comprehensive data privacy statute like some other states, imposes obligations on businesses to protect sensitive personal information. This includes the duty to exercise reasonable care in selecting and overseeing vendors who handle such data. Contractual agreements are a primary mechanism for ensuring vendors meet these standards, and proactive monitoring helps identify and mitigate risks before they lead to breaches. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the vendor's self-attestation of compliance without independent verification. This is professionally unacceptable because it abdicates the firm's responsibility to ensure data protection. Alabama law expects businesses to take active steps to safeguard data, and a passive reliance on vendor claims is insufficient to meet the standard of reasonable care. Another incorrect approach is to only address security concerns after a breach has occurred. This reactive stance is professionally unsound, as it fails to prevent harm and may lead to significant legal and reputational damage. Alabama statutes, such as those related to data breach notification, imply a need for preventative measures. Waiting for a breach to occur means the firm has already failed in its duty to protect data. Finally, an incorrect approach is to assume that standard vendor contracts are sufficient without tailoring them to the specific data being handled and the potential risks involved. This is professionally negligent because it overlooks the unique security requirements associated with different types of sensitive information. Alabama law requires a level of diligence commensurate with the sensitivity of the data. Generic contracts may not adequately address these specific needs, leaving the firm exposed. Professionals should adopt a risk-based decision-making framework. This involves identifying potential threats, assessing their likelihood and impact, and implementing controls to mitigate them. For third-party risk, this means conducting thorough due diligence, establishing clear contractual obligations, continuously monitoring vendor performance, and having robust incident response plans in place. Question 6. Operational review demonstrates that a software development company based in Birmingham, Alabama, has discovered a potential unauthorized access to its customer database. The access appears to have occurred approximately 2 weeks ago, and the company is concerned about the potential exposure of sensitive personal information. The company's IT department has begun an internal investigation, including reviewing server logs and attempting to identify the scope of the intrusion. The CEO is considering instructing the IT department to immediately wipe and reconfigure the affected servers to prevent further access and to restore from a backup, believing this will contain the issue and protect customer data. Considering the legal framework of cyberlaw in Alabama, what is the most appropriate course of action for the company? Option A. Instruct the IT department to proceed with wiping and reconfiguring the affected servers to prevent further access and restore from backup, as this is the most efficient way to secure the data. Option B. Continue the internal investigation without involving external legal counsel, focusing solely on identifying the extent of the breach, and then deciding on notification based on internal assessment. Option C. Immediately halt the internal investigation and engage legal counsel specializing in Alabama cyberlaw and data privacy to guide all subsequent actions, including evidence preservation and potential breach notification. Option D. Immediately notify all affected customers and the Alabama Attorney General's office about the potential breach, without first conducting a thorough investigation or consulting legal counsel. Correct answer is C. Immediately halt the internal investigation and engage legal counsel specializing in Alabama cyberlaw and data privacy to guide all subsequent actions, including evidence preservation and potential breach notification. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between a company's desire to protect its intellectual property and the legal obligations to disclose certain information, particularly when dealing with potential data breaches and regulatory investigations. Navigating these competing interests requires a nuanced understanding of Alabama's specific cyberlaw framework, including data breach notification laws and evidence preservation requirements. Careful judgment is essential to avoid legal repercussions and maintain public trust. The best professional approach involves immediately engaging legal counsel, specializing in Alabama cyberlaw and data privacy. This approach is correct because it ensures that all actions taken are compliant with the Alabama Computer Crimes Act and the Alabama Data Breach Notification Act. Legal counsel can provide expert guidance on the scope of the investigation, the legal requirements for evidence preservation under Alabama law, and the specific notification obligations to affected individuals and the Alabama Attorney General's office if a breach is confirmed. This proactive engagement minimizes the risk of spoliation of evidence and ensures timely and legally compliant reporting. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with a broad internal data sweep without legal oversight, potentially deleting or altering evidence that could be critical for an investigation or legal defense. This failure to preserve evidence could violate Alabama's rules regarding the preservation of digital evidence, leading to sanctions or adverse inferences in any subsequent legal proceedings. Another incorrect approach is to delay notification to affected individuals and the Alabama Attorney General's office beyond the statutory timeframe stipulated by the Alabama Data Breach Notification Act. This delay, driven by a desire to control the narrative or avoid reputational damage, constitutes a direct violation of the law and can result in significant penalties. Finally, an incorrect approach is to assume that all data is company property and can be freely accessed and analyzed without considering potential privacy implications or legal discovery obligations under Alabama law. This oversight can lead to the inadvertent collection of privileged information or the violation of individual privacy rights, creating further legal complications. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and expert consultation. This involves 1. Recognizing the potential legal implications of any cyber incident. 2. Immediately seeking specialized legal counsel to understand jurisdictional requirements. 3. Following legal advice regarding evidence preservation and data handling. 4. Adhering strictly to statutory notification timelines and requirements. 5. Maintaining a clear audit trail of all actions taken. Question 7. Stakeholder feedback indicates that a technology company based in Alabama, which offers its software as a service, SaaS, platform globally, and collects user data, has received inquiries from users in the European Union regarding their data privacy rights. The company's current data handling practices were developed solely based on U.S. federal and Alabama state privacy laws. What is the most appropriate course of action for the company to ensure compliance with relevant data protection regulations? Option A. Broadly interpret legitimate interests as the primary legal basis for all data processing of EU residents, without conducting a specific balancing test against individual rights. Option B. Implement basic website security protocols and rely on existing U.S. privacy policies, as these are sufficient for all user data regardless of their location. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive assessment of the company's data processing activities concerning EU residents, establish a lawful basis for processing, implement robust data security measures, and update privacy notices to reflect GDPR requirements, while also considering the need for a data protection impact assessment. Option D. Assume that since the company is headquartered in Alabama and has no physical presence in the EU, the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, does not apply to its operations. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive assessment of the company's data processing activities concerning EU residents, establish a lawful basis for processing, implement robust data security measures, and update privacy notices to reflect GDPR requirements, while also considering the need for a data protection impact assessment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the operational needs of a business with the stringent data protection obligations imposed by the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. The company is operating in Alabama, but its website is accessible globally, and it collects personal data from individuals in the European Union. This extraterritorial reach of the GDPR necessitates careful consideration of its applicability, even for a U.S.-based entity. The core challenge lies in determining the appropriate legal basis for processing personal data and ensuring adequate safeguards are in place to protect the rights of EU data subjects, all while maintaining business functionality. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a proactive and comprehensive approach to GDPR compliance. This includes conducting a thorough data protection impact assessment, DPIA, to identify and mitigate risks associated with processing EU residents' personal data. It also necessitates establishing a clear legal basis for processing, such as obtaining explicit consent for marketing communications and relying on legitimate interests for essential operational data, while ensuring these interests do not override the fundamental rights and freedoms of the data subjects. Furthermore, implementing robust data security measures, providing clear and accessible privacy notices, and establishing procedures for handling data subject access requests are crucial. This approach directly addresses the GDPR core principles of accountability, data minimization, purpose limitation, and transparency, ensuring the company acts responsibly and legally when handling personal data of individuals within the EU. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that because the company is based in Alabama and does not have a physical presence in the EU, the GDPR does not apply. This ignores the extraterritorial scope of the GDPR, which applies to the processing of personal data of data subjects in the Union, where the processing activities are related to the offering of goods or services to such data subjects in the Union, or the monitoring of their behavior as far as their behavior takes place within the Union. This failure to recognize the GDPR applicability can lead to significant legal and financial penalties. Another incorrect approach is to implement minimal data protection measures, such as relying solely on standard website security protocols without specific consideration for the GDPR requirements. This overlooks the need for data protection by design and by default, and the specific obligations regarding data subject rights, consent management, and data breach notification. Such an approach fails to adequately protect the rights and freedoms of individuals whose data is being processed. A third incorrect approach is to broadly interpret legitimate interests as a justification for all data processing activities without conducting a balancing test. The GDPR requires a careful assessment to ensure that the company's legitimate interests do not override the interests or fundamental rights and freedoms of the data subject. Failing to perform this balancing test and document the assessment can render the reliance on legitimate interests invalid. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should adopt a risk-based approach. First, they must accurately determine the applicability of relevant regulations, considering the location of the data subjects and the nature of the data processing activities. Second, they should engage in a thorough assessment of data processing activities, including conducting DPIA where necessary, to identify potential risks. Third, they must establish appropriate legal bases for all data processing and implement technical and organizational measures to ensure compliance with data protection principles. Finally, continuous monitoring and review of data protection practices are essential to adapt to evolving legal requirements and business operations. Question 8. The efficiency study reveals that Health First Clinic, a healthcare provider operating in Alabama, is considering adopting a new cloud-based electronic health record (EHR) system that promises significant improvements in patient data accessibility and administrative workflow. However, the study also highlights that the proposed system's default security configurations are less stringent than the clinic's current on-premise system, and the vendor's standard contract offers limited liability for data breaches. Given these findings, what is the most prudent course of action for Health First Clinic to ensure compliance with cybersecurity laws and regulations, particularly concerning the protection of protected health information? 5. Option A. Conduct a thorough risk assessment of the new EHR system. Negotiate enhanced security clauses in the vendor contract. Implement robust encryption and access controls, and provide comprehensive staff training before full adoption. Option B. Proceed with the adoption of the new EHR system to realize efficiency gains, relying on the vendor's assurances and the hope that the less stringent default security will not lead to a breach. Option C. Implement the new EHR system with its default security settings and plan to conduct a security audit only after the system has been in operation for a year or if a data breach is suspected. Option D. Adopt the new EHR system, but limit its use to non-sensitive patient data initially, while deferring significant security enhancements until budget allows for future upgrades. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough risk assessment of the new EHR system, negotiate enhanced security clauses in the vendor contract, implement robust encryption and access controls, and provide comprehensive staff training before full adoption. Explanation: the efficiency study reveals a critical vulnerability in the data handling practices of a prominent Alabama-based healthcare provider, Health First Clinic. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the immediate need for operational efficiency with the paramount legal and ethical obligations to protect sensitive patient health information, under Alabama and federal law, specifically the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA. The potential for a data breach, even if unintentional, carries severe consequences, including regulatory fines, reputational damage, and erosion of patient trust. Careful judgment is required to implement solutions that are both effective and compliant. The best professional approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment and the implementation of robust security measures. This includes encrypting all stored and transmitted PHI, implementing multi-factor authentication for all access points, conducting regular security awareness training for all staff, and establishing a clear incident response plan. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the identified vulnerabilities by proactively safeguarding PHI, aligning with the core principles of HIPAA security rule, which mandates administrative, physical, and technical safeguards to protect electronic PHI. Alabama law, while not having a comprehensive standalone cybersecurity statute for healthcare providers, defers to federal standards like HIPAA for the protection of health information. This proactive and layered security strategy minimizes the likelihood of a breach and ensures compliance with federal mandates. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize the efficiency gains from the new software without adequately addressing the security implications. For instance, deploying the software with default security settings and relying solely on the vendor's basic assurances would be a significant regulatory failure. This overlooks the clinic's responsibility under HIPAA to ensure the security of PHI, regardless of whether the data is managed internally or by a third-party vendor, business associate. The clinic would remain liable for any breaches. Another unacceptable approach would be to implement the new software and then conduct a post-implementation security audit only if a breach occurs. This reactive strategy is ethically and legally unsound. HIPAA requires proactive risk analysis and management. Waiting for a breach to occur is a failure to meet the minimum necessary standard for data protection and demonstrates a disregard for patient privacy. Finally, implementing the software with minimal security enhancements and relying on the hope that no malicious actors will target the clinic is a dangerous and unprofessional gamble. This approach ignores the pervasive threat landscape and the legal obligations to protect PHI. It fails to demonstrate due diligence and a commitment to safeguarding sensitive information, which is a fundamental ethical and legal requirement. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential risks and vulnerabilities, followed by a thorough review of applicable regulations, HIPAA in this case. Solutions should then be evaluated based on their ability to mitigate identified risks while ensuring compliance. A phased implementation, with continuous monitoring and adaptation of security measures, is crucial. Prioritizing patient privacy and data security over immediate, unmitigated efficiency gains is the cornerstone of responsible practice in this field. Question 9. Quality control measures reveal that an Alabama law enforcement agency is investigating a series of sophisticated phishing attacks targeting residents of Mobile County. During the investigation, investigators identify a primary suspect and believe that crucial evidence, including communication logs and financial transaction details related to the phishing scheme, is stored on the suspect's personal cloud storage account. Given the urgency to prevent further victim losses, what is the most legally sound and ethically appropriate course of action for the investigators to pursue to access this digital evidence? Option A. Immediately access the suspect's cloud storage account by using publicly available information to guess or brute force the login credentials, believing the urgency of the investigation justifies bypassing formal procedures. Option B. Contact the cloud service provider and request immediate access to the suspect's account based on the investigator's assessment of the threat, without presenting any legal documentation. Option C. Instruct an undercover officer to create a fictitious persona and attempt to gain access to the suspect's cloud storage account by befriending the suspect online and eliciting login information. Option D. Seek a judicially authorized search warrant from an Alabama court, demonstrating probable cause that evidence of the phishing attacks will be found within the suspect's cloud storage account. Correct answer is D. Seek a judicially authorized search warrant from an Alabama court, demonstrating probable cause that evidence of the phishing attacks will be found within the suspect's cloud storage account. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a significant professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for swift law enforcement action to combat cybercrime and the constitutional rights of individuals, particularly the right to privacy and protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. Navigating this requires a meticulous understanding of Alabama's specific legal framework governing digital evidence and law enforcement access. The rapid evolution of technology further complicates matters, demanding that law enforcement remain current with both technological capabilities and the legal boundaries that govern their use. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves obtaining a judicially authorized warrant based on probable cause. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the protections afforded by the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, as interpreted and applied within Alabama law. A warrant ensures that a neutral and detached magistrate has reviewed the evidence and determined that there is probable cause to believe that evidence of a crime will be found in the location to be searched. This process safeguards individual liberties by preventing arbitrary or overreaching government intrusion. Alabama Code Section 15-5-1 et sec. outlines the procedures for obtaining search warrants, emphasizing the requirement of probable cause and specificity in the warrant's description of the place to be searched and the things to be seized. Incorrect approach is analysis. Initiating a search of the suspect's cloud storage account without any prior judicial authorization, relying solely on the belief that the data is relevant to an ongoing investigation, is a direct violation of Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches. This approach disregards the established legal requirement for probable cause and a warrant, opening the door to potential suppression of evidence and civil liability for the law enforcement agency. Accessing the suspect's cloud storage by posing as the suspect or a trusted associate to gain entry is deceptive and unethical. While it might bypass technical security measures, it fundamentally undermines the legal process and the integrity of evidence collection. Such actions could be construed as unauthorized access or computer trespass under Alabama law, and the evidence obtained would likely be inadmissible in court due to its tainted origin. Contacting the cloud service provider and requesting immediate access to the suspect's data based on a general concern about ongoing criminal activity, without presenting a warrant or demonstrating exigent circumstances, is also legally insufficient. While providers may cooperate with law enforcement, their legal obligation to protect user data is significant. Without a valid legal order, such a request places the provider in a precarious legal position, and the evidence obtained would be subject to challenge. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement must adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes legal compliance and constitutional rights. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the specific legal requirements for digital evidence collection in Alabama, including warrant procedures and exceptions. 2. Assessing the situation to determine if probable cause exists and if exigent circumstances justify any deviation from standard warrant procedures. 3. Consulting with legal counsel to ensure all investigative actions are legally sound. 4. Documenting all investigative steps meticulously to create a clear and defensible record. Question 10. Market research demonstrates a significant increase in attempted fraudulent e-commerce transactions targeting businesses operating within Alabama. A growing online retailer specializing in high-value electronics is experiencing a rise in chargebacks. The company needs to implement a robust fraud prevention strategy. If the average value of a fraudulent transaction is $500 and the company estimates it processes 10,000 transactions per month, with a current fraud rate of 2%, what is the estimated monthly financial loss due to fraud, and what percentage of this loss could be mitigated by implementing a strategy that reduces the fraud rate by 50%. Option A. The estimated monthly financial loss is $100,000. A strategy reducing the fraud rate by 50% could mitigate $50,000 in losses. Option B. The estimated monthly financial loss is $10,000. A strategy reducing the fraud rate by 50% could mitigate $5,000 in losses. Option C. The estimated monthly financial loss is $50,000. A strategy reducing the fraud rate by 50% could mitigate $25,000 in losses. Option D. The estimated monthly financial loss is $100,000. A strategy reducing the fraud rate by 50% could mitigate $25,000 in losses. The correct answer is A. The estimated monthly financial loss is $100,000. A strategy reducing the fraud rate by 50% could mitigate $50,000 in losses. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent risks associated with online transactions and the need to comply with Alabama's specific e-commerce regulations, particularly concerning consumer protection and data privacy. The company must balance efficient business operations with legal obligations to prevent financial losses and maintain customer trust. Careful judgment is required to accurately assess the risk of fraudulent transactions and implement appropriate mitigation strategies. The best approach involves a multi-layered risk assessment strategy that combines automated fraud detection with manual review for high-risk transactions. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of due diligence mandated by Alabama law for online merchants. Specifically, Alabama law, like many other jurisdictions, places a responsibility on businesses to take reasonable steps to prevent fraudulent transactions, thereby protecting both the consumer and the business. By employing a system that flags suspicious activity based on predefined parameters e.g., IP address anomalies, unusual purchase patterns, mismatched billing/shipping addresses, and then subjecting these flagged transactions to human scrutiny, the company can effectively identify and block fraudulent orders while minimizing the impact on legitimate customers. This proactive stance reduces chargebacks, protects revenue, and upholds consumer confidence, all of which are critical for sustainable e-commerce operations in Alabama. An approach that relies solely on automated fraud detection without any manual oversight is professionally unacceptable. This is because automated systems, while efficient, can generate false positives, blocking legitimate transactions, or false negatives, allowing fraudulent transactions. Without a human element to review borderline cases, the company risks alienating genuine customers and failing to catch sophisticated fraud schemes, leading to financial losses and potential legal repercussions under Alabama's consumer protection statutes. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to implement overly restrictive fraud prevention measures that significantly delay or complicate the checkout process for all customers. While intended to prevent fraud, such measures can lead to high cart abandonment rates, directly impacting sales and revenue. This approach fails to strike a balance between security and customer experience, potentially violating principles of fair business practices by creating undue burdens on consumers. Finally, an approach that ignores transaction risk altogether and processes all orders without any fraud checks is fundamentally flawed and legally precarious. This would expose the business to significant financial losses from chargebacks and potentially violate consumer protection laws in Alabama that require businesses to act in good faith and take reasonable precautions against fraudulent activities. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the specific e-commerce laws and regulations applicable in Alabama. This includes researching best practices in fraud prevention, evaluating the cost-benefit of different security measures, and continuously monitoring transaction data to adapt the fraud detection strategy as new threats emerge. A risk-based approach, where resources are allocated to address the most significant threats, is crucial for effective and compliant e-commerce operations. Question 11. Market research demonstrates a growing demand for digital content within Alabama. A software company is developing a new DRM system intended to protect its copyrighted digital media. Before deploying this system to Alabama consumers, What is the most prudent risk assessment approach to ensure compliance with Alabama's legal framework and ethical consumer practices? Option A. Implement the DRM system immediately, assuming that any technical measure to prevent unauthorized copying is inherently compliant with Alabama law, and address any user complaints on a case-by-case basis. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive legal and ethical impact assessment specifically for Alabama consumers, evaluating potential conflicts with fair use provisions, consumer rights, and any specific Alabama statutes governing digital content and intellectual property to identify and mitigate risks proactively. Option C. Focus the risk assessment solely on the technical robustness of the DRM system and its ability to prevent unauthorized distribution, as the primary goal is copyright protection. Option D. Prioritize the cost-effectiveness and ease of implementation of the DRM system, assuming that market forces will naturally balance consumer rights with intellectual property protection. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive legal and ethical impact assessment specifically for Alabama consumers, evaluating potential conflicts with fair use provisions, consumer rights, and any specific Alabama statutes governing digital content and intellectual property to identify and mitigate risks proactively. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the legitimate business interest of protecting intellectual property through digital rights management, DRM, with the potential for DRM to inadvertently restrict lawful uses of copyrighted material, thereby infringing on user rights. The Alabama Cyberlaw Internet Law framework, particularly as it relates to consumer protection and fair use principles, necessitates a careful risk assessment to ensure DRM implementation does not create undue burdens or violate established legal boundaries. The best professional approach involves conducting a thorough, proactive risk assessment that specifically evaluates the potential impact of the proposed DRM system on Alabama consumers' ability to engage in legally permissible activities. This includes analyzing whether the DRM might prevent legitimate fair use, such as for criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, or research, as recognized under Alabama law and federal copyright principles that Alabama courts would consider. It also requires assessing whether the DRM's technical measures could be circumvented for lawful purposes, or if they impose unreasonable costs or technical barriers on users. This approach prioritizes compliance and user rights by identifying and mitigating potential legal and ethical issues before deployment, aligning with the principle of responsible technology implementation. An incorrect approach would be to implement the DRM system without any specific assessment of its impact on Alabama users' rights, relying solely on the technical capability to enforce copyright. This fails to acknowledge the legal limitations on DRM, such as those that might be interpreted under Alabama's consumer protection statutes or principles of fair use, which can override strict technological enforcement. Such an approach risks legal challenges and reputational damage by potentially infringing on users' rights. Another incorrect approach is to assume that any DRM implementation is automatically compliant with Alabama law as long as it technically prevents unauthorized copying. This overlooks the nuanced legal landscape, where DRM must not be used to circumvent legal exceptions to copyright. Alabama law, like federal law, recognizes that copyright holders cannot use technological measures to prevent users from exercising rights that would otherwise be available to them under copyright law. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the cost-effectiveness of the DRM solution without considering its legal and ethical implications for Alabama consumers is also professionally unsound. While cost is a business consideration, it cannot supersede legal obligations and ethical responsibilities to ensure that intellectual property protection measures do not unduly harm or restrict the rights of users within Alabama. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific legal and ethical obligations within Alabama concerning digital rights and consumer protection. This involves identifying potential conflicts between DRM implementation and established user rights, conducting thorough risk assessments tailored to the specific jurisdiction, and prioritizing solutions that balance intellectual property protection with legal compliance and ethical considerations. Question 12. Market research demonstrates a significant opportunity to expand customer engagement in Alabama through targeted digital advertising campaigns. To achieve this, A company plans to collect detailed demographic information, online browsing habits, and purchase history from potential customers within the state. The company has a general privacy policy in place, but has not conducted a specific privacy impact assessment for this new initiative. What is the most appropriate approach to ensure compliance with Alabama's privacy expectations and ethical data handling practices? Option A. Conduct a detailed privacy impact assessment to identify specific data types, intended uses, and potential risks, and implement a consent mechanism that requires explicit opt-in for the collection and use of sensitive personal information, such as browsing habits and purchase history, for marketing purposes. Option B. Rely on an opt-out consent mechanism for all collected data, including browsing habits and purchase history, informing consumers of the data collection through a prominent link to the general privacy policy. Option C. Proceed with collecting all available data, assuming that the existing general privacy policy adequately covers the scope of the new marketing initiative, and that consumers implicitly consent by visiting the company's website. Option D. Assume that since Alabama does not have a comprehensive, overarching data privacy statute, the company has broad discretion in collecting and using personal data for marketing, as long as it does not engage in outright fraudulent activity. Correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed privacy impact assessment to identify specific data types, intended uses, and potential risks, and implement a consent mechanism that requires explicit opt-in for the collection and use of sensitive personal information, such as browsing habits and purchase history, for marketing purposes. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing business objectives with stringent privacy obligations under Alabama law, specifically concerning the collection and use of sensitive personal information for marketing purposes. A misstep can lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of consumer trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance while still enabling effective market research. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that prioritizes data minimization and explicit consent for sensitive data. This aligns with the principles of privacy by design and by default, which are implicitly encouraged by Alabama's approach to data protection, even in the absence of a single, overarching comprehensive privacy statute like some other states. By identifying the specific types of data being collected, the intended use, and the potential risks to individuals, a company can implement appropriate safeguards and obtain informed consent where necessary. This proactive and risk-based methodology ensures that the company's marketing efforts are conducted in a manner that respects individual privacy rights and minimizes the likelihood of a data breach or misuse of personal information. An incorrect approach that involves collecting all available data without a clear purpose, or without obtaining explicit consent for sensitive information, poses significant regulatory and ethical risks. This method disregards the principle of data minimization and increases the likelihood of collecting more data than is necessary, thereby amplifying potential privacy harms. It also fails to adequately inform individuals about how their data will be used, which is a fundamental aspect of ethical data handling and a key expectation under privacy principles. Another incorrect approach that relies solely on broad, opt-out consent mechanisms for sensitive personal information is also professionally unacceptable. While opt-out mechanisms may be permissible for less sensitive data in certain contexts, they are generally insufficient when dealing with information that could be particularly harmful if misused. Alabama law, while not as prescriptive as some other jurisdictions, still expects a higher standard of care when sensitive data is involved, and relying on an opt-out rather than explicit opt-in consent for such data is a failure to meet that expectation. A further incorrect approach that assumes existing general privacy policies are sufficient without a specific review for the new marketing initiative is problematic. General policies may not adequately address the nuances of the data being collected for this particular research or the specific consent requirements that might be triggered. A failure to conduct a targeted review means potential gaps in compliance are likely to be overlooked, leaving the company vulnerable to regulatory scrutiny and consumer complaints. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the specific data elements to be collected, understanding the intended use of that data, and then assessing the potential privacy risks associated with that collection and use. This should be followed by a review of applicable Alabama laws and any relevant industry best practices. The next step is to determine the appropriate consent mechanism, prioritizing explicit consent for sensitive data. Finally, implementing technical and organizational safeguards to protect the collected data and establishing procedures for data retention and deletion are crucial steps in ensuring responsible data handling. Question 13. Compliance review shows that a junior associate is preparing a presentation on the historical development of Internet law in Alabama. The associate has submitted a draft outline that includes several potential areas of focus. To ensure the presentation is accurate and relevant, what area of historical legal development is most critical for understanding the foundational challenges and evolution of Internet law in Alabama? Option A. The technological advancements in Internet service provider technology and network architecture in Alabama during the 1990s. Option B. The history of telecommunications, infrastructure development and regulation in Alabama prior to the widespread adoption of the Internet. Option C. The evolution of jurisdictional principles in Alabama courts as they adapted to out-of-state and international online activities. Option D. The impact of early federal legislation, specifically designed to regulate online content and e-commerce in the United States. The correct answer is C. The evolution of jurisdictional principles in Alabama courts as they adapted to out-of-state and international online activities. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an understanding of how early legal frameworks, developed before the widespread adoption of the Internet, struggled to adapt to new forms of communication and commerce. The core difficulty lies in applying existing, often geographically bound, legal principles to a borderless digital realm. Professionals must exercise careful judgment to identify which historical legal developments are most relevant to understanding the foundational challenges of Internet law in Alabama. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves identifying the legal developments that directly address the novel issues presented by the Internet's emergence, such as the challenges to traditional notions of jurisdiction and the application of existing tort and contract law to online activities. This approach is correct because it focuses on the evolution of legal thought and precedent in response to the Internet's unique characteristics. Specifically, early Internet law in Alabama, as elsewhere, grappled with how to assert jurisdiction over entities operating solely online, leading to landmark cases that began to define the minimum contacts necessary for a state court to exercise power over an out-of-state defendant in the digital space. Understanding these foundational jurisdictional battles is crucial for grasping the historical development of Internet law. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the development of specific Internet technologies without considering their legal implications. While technological advancements are the backdrop, the historical development of Internet law is about how legal systems responded to these technologies, not the technologies themselves. This fails to address the legal evolution required by the question. Another incorrect approach would be to concentrate on post-2000 legislative acts that specifically target Internet-related crimes or commerce. While these are important, they represent a later stage of development. The question asks about the historical development implying a focus on the earlier, foundational challenges and how existing laws were stretched or reinterpreted before dedicated Internet legislation became commonplace. This approach misses the crucial early period of adaptation. A further incorrect approach would be to examine the history of telecommunications law in Alabama without acknowledging the fundamental differences between traditional telephony and the interactive, global nature of the Internet. While there are overlaps, the Internet introduced entirely new legal questions regarding content, privacy, and commerce that telecommunications law alone did not adequately address. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this by first considering the core legal principles that were challenged by the Internet: jurisdiction, contract, tort, and intellectual property. Then, they should research how Alabama courts and legal scholars began to interpret and apply these principles in the context of early online activities. The focus should be on the problems the Internet created for existing law, and the solutions or adaptations that emerged, particularly in the formative years before comprehensive federal Internet legislation. This involves tracing the lineage of key legal concepts as they were tested and refined in the nascent digital age. Question 14. The assessment process reveals that an e-commerce company based in Alabama is experiencing rapid growth and expanding its customer base across the United States. The company primarily sells consumer goods online and collects customer data for marketing purposes. Given the national scope of its operations and the nature of the data it handles, what is the most prudent approach to ensure compliance with national legislation and regulations impacting its internet-based business activities in Alabama? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive review of all applicable federal laws and regulations, such as COPPA, ECPA, and FTCA, and develop internal policies and procedures to ensure adherence, while also staying informed about relevant federal enforcement trends. Option B. Assume that standard industry practices for online businesses are sufficient for compliance with national legislation, without conducting a specific assessment of federal requirements. Option C. Adopt a reactive strategy, addressing any potential national regulatory issues only if a customer complaint or government inquiry arises. Option D. Focus exclusively on Alabama state laws and regulations related to online business, assuming that national legislation does not apply to businesses operating within a single state's physical boundaries. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive review of all applicable federal laws and regulations, such as COPPA, ECPA, and FTCA, and develop internal policies and procedures to ensure adherence, while also staying informed about relevant federal enforcement trends. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a significant challenge for businesses operating online in Alabama, navigating the complex landscape of national legislation and regulations that impact their digital operations. This scenario is professionally challenging because the rapid evolution of technology often outpaces the clarity and specificity of legal frameworks, requiring constant vigilance and proactive risk management. Businesses must not only understand existing laws, but also anticipate potential future regulatory shifts. Careful judgment is required to balance innovation and growth with compliance and ethical conduct. The best approach involves a comprehensive and proactive risk assessment that prioritizes understanding and adherence to relevant national legislation and regulations impacting internet law in Alabama. This includes identifying all applicable federal laws, such as the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, COPPA. If the business targets children, the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, ECPA, concerning data interception, and potentially aspects of the Federal Trade Commission Act, FTCA, related to deceptive online practices. It also necessitates staying abreast of any federal guidance or enforcement actions that interpret these laws. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the core requirement of national legislation compliance, ensuring that the business operates within the bounds of federal law, thereby mitigating legal and reputational risks. It fosters a culture of compliance by embedding regulatory awareness into operational strategy. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on state-specific Alabama laws and ignore national legislation. This is professionally unacceptable because federal laws often preempt state laws in areas of interstate commerce and internet activity. Failing to consider national legislation leaves the business vulnerable to federal enforcement actions, fines, and lawsuits, regardless of state-level compliance. Another incorrect approach is to assume that because an online business operates primarily within Alabama, it is exempt from national regulations. This is a critical misunderstanding of federal authority over interstate commerce, which the internet inherently facilitates. Such an assumption leads to significant legal exposure. Finally, adopting a reactive approach, where the business only addresses regulatory concerns when a complaint or investigation arises, is also professionally unsound. This strategy is inherently risky, as it implies a lack of due diligence and a willingness to operate in a gray area. It fails to proactively identify and mitigate risks, potentially leading to severe consequences and damage to the business's reputation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough identification of all potentially applicable national laws and regulations based on the business's activities, target audience, and data handling practices. This should be followed by a detailed assessment of compliance requirements, the implementation of robust internal policies and procedures, and ongoing monitoring and adaptation to legal and technological changes. Regular legal counsel and expert consultation are vital components of this framework. Question 15. Implementation of a new online subscription service by a company based in Georgia which offers digital content accessible globally, has led to a dispute with an Alabama resident who claims the service misrepresented its features. The Alabama resident wishes to sue the Georgia-based company in an Alabama state court. What is the most appropriate initial step for the Alabama resident's legal counsel to determine if Alabama courts have personal jurisdiction over the Georgia company? Option A. Focus solely on the physical location of the servers hosting the company's website, as this is the primary determinant of where a lawsuit can be filed. Option B. Immediately file a lawsuit in an Alabama state court, assuming that any dispute involving an Alabama resident automatically grants Alabama jurisdiction. Option C. Advise the client that since the company is based in Georgia, Alabama courts cannot possibly have jurisdiction, regardless of the nature of the online service. Option D. Analyze the Georgia company's website and online interactions with Alabama residents to determine if the company has established sufficient minimum contacts with Alabama, as interpreted by Alabama's long-arm statute and relevant case law, to justify jurisdiction. The correct answer is D. Analyze the Georgia company's website and online interactions with Alabama residents to determine if the company has established sufficient minimum contacts with Alabama, as interpreted by Alabama's long-arm statute and relevant case law, to justify jurisdiction. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common jurisdictional challenge in cyberspace, specifically within Alabama. A business operating online faces potential legal exposure in multiple states, even if its physical presence is limited. Determining which state's laws apply to a dispute involving an Alabama resident and an out-of-state online service provider requires careful analysis of Alabama's long-arm statute and relevant case law concerning minimum contacts. The challenge lies in balancing the need to protect Alabama consumers with the principle of avoiding undue burden on interstate commerce and out-of-state entities. Professional judgment is required to assess the likelihood of establishing jurisdiction in Alabama and to advise the client accordingly. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough analysis of Alabama's long-arm statute, ALA. Code Section 6-3-2, and its interpretation by Alabama courts regarding minimum contacts. This requires examining whether the out-of-state service provider has purposefully availed itself of the privilege of conducting activities within Alabama, such that it could reasonably anticipate being hailed into an Alabama court. Factors to consider include the nature and quality of the interactions with Alabama residents, the extent of business conducted in Alabama, and whether the dispute arises out of or relates to those contacts. If these minimum contacts are established, and exercising jurisdiction would not offend traditional notions of fair play and substantial justice, then Alabama courts would likely have personal jurisdiction. This approach aligns with established legal principles for asserting jurisdiction over non-resident defendants in the digital age. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to assume that because the service provider is located outside Alabama, Alabama courts automatically lack jurisdiction. This ignores the principles of long-arm statutes and minimum contacts, which are designed to extend jurisdiction to non-residents who engage in sufficient activity within a state. Another incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the location of the server hosting the website. While server location can be a factor, it is generally not determinative of jurisdiction. The focus is on the defendant's purposeful engagement with the forum state's residents. Finally, assuming jurisdiction exists simply because an Alabama resident is involved is also flawed. The focus must be on the defendant's contacts with Alabama, not merely the plaintiff's residence. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach jurisdictional issues by first identifying the relevant state's long-arm statute and its judicial interpretations. They must then meticulously analyze the defendant's contacts with the forum state, applying the minimum contacts test. This involves evaluating the purposeful availment, the relatedness of the cause of action to the contacts, and the fairness of exercising jurisdiction. A structured approach, starting with statutory analysis and moving to case-specific factual application, ensures that legal advice is grounded in established precedent and protects clients from unnecessary litigation or the assertion of jurisdiction where it is not legally permissible. Question 16. To address the challenge of a suspected data breach involving sensitive customer information on a server located in Birmingham, Alabama, what is the most prudent initial course of action for the IT security team? Option A. Immediately isolate the affected server and network segments to prevent further unauthorized access, while simultaneously launching a forensic investigation to determine the scope and nature of the breach. Option B. Issue a public statement to reassure customers that the company is aware of a potential issue and is investigating, without disclosing specific details until more information is available. Option C. Immediately shut down all network services connected to the affected server to prevent any further data loss, regardless of the impact on business operations. Option D. Begin internal efforts to patch vulnerabilities and restore systems from backups before engaging external legal counsel or forensic specialists. Correct answer is A. Immediately isolate the affected server and network segments to prevent further unauthorized access, while simultaneously launching a forensic investigation to determine the scope and nature of the breach. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the sensitive nature of the data involved and the potential for significant harm to individuals and the organization if a data breach is mishandled. Alabama law, like many jurisdictions, imposes strict duties on entities to protect personal information and to respond appropriately to security incidents. The speed and accuracy of the response are critical to mitigating damages, complying with legal obligations, and maintaining public trust. The need to balance immediate containment with thorough investigation and transparent communication requires careful judgment. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately isolating the affected systems to prevent further unauthorized access or data exfiltration, while simultaneously initiating a comprehensive forensic investigation to determine the scope and nature of the breach. This approach prioritizes containment and evidence preservation, which are fundamental to understanding the incident and fulfilling legal reporting requirements under Alabama law, such as those potentially related to the Alabama Computer Crimes Act or breach notification statutes. This dual focus ensures that the immediate threat is addressed while laying the groundwork for a legally compliant and effective remediation strategy. Incorrect approaches analysis. Initiating a public relations campaign to downplay the incident before a thorough investigation is complete is professionally unacceptable. This approach risks violating Alabama's breach notification laws, which often require timely and accurate disclosure to affected individuals and regulatory bodies. Prematurely minimizing the incident can lead to accusations of deception and further erode trust. Immediately shutting down all network services without a targeted containment strategy or forensic preservation plan is also professionally unacceptable. While it might seem like a drastic measure to stop a breach, it can destroy crucial digital evidence needed for investigation and legal proceedings, and it can cause significant operational disruption without a clear understanding of the threat's origin or extent. This lack of targeted action could hinder compliance with any specific Alabama cybersecurity incident response mandates. Contacting external legal counsel only after attempting to remediate the issue internally without proper forensic expertise is professionally unacceptable. While legal counsel is vital, delaying their involvement until after initial, potentially flawed, remediation efforts can compromise the integrity of the investigation and the legal advice received. Alabama law often emphasizes the importance of prompt and proper handling of data breaches, and involving legal experts early ensures that all actions taken are legally sound and aligned with reporting obligations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured incident response framework that prioritizes containment, investigation, eradication, and recovery. This framework should be informed by relevant state laws, such as those in Alabama concerning data breaches and cybersecurity. A key decision-making process involves establishing clear roles and responsibilities, activating an incident response team, and following predefined protocols that balance immediate action with thorough analysis and legal compliance. The goal is to minimize harm, preserve evidence, and meet all statutory obligations. Question 17. The review process indicates that a financial institution in Birmingham, Alabama, has detected unusual outbound network traffic originating from several employee workstations, leading to concerns about potential data exfiltration. The IT security team is investigating whether this activity constitutes unauthorized access to computer systems or a malicious software infection. Which of the following investigative approaches best aligns with the requirements for identifying and responding to cybercrimes under Alabama law? Option A. Focus on restoring system functionality by reimaging the affected workstations, disregarding the specific nature of the outbound traffic to expedite return to normal operations. Option B. Immediately block all outbound network traffic from the affected workstations to prevent further data loss, assuming the activity is a standard malware infection without further investigation. Option C. Conduct a forensic analysis of the affected workstations to identify the specific processes, network connections, and data accessed, correlating findings with known patterns of unauthorized access and data theft as defined by the Alabama Computer Crimes Act. Option D. Issue a company-wide alert about a potential phishing campaign, redirecting resources to user awareness training without investigating the source of the outbound traffic. The correct answer is C. Conduct a forensic analysis of the affected workstations to identify the specific processes, network connections, and data accessed, correlating findings with known patterns of unauthorized access and data theft as defined by the Alabama Computer Crimes Act. Explanation. The review process indicates a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the rapid evolution of cyber threats and the need for immediate, accurate identification and response within the specific legal framework of Alabama. The challenge lies in distinguishing between different types of cybercrimes, each with unique investigative pathways and legal implications under Alabama law, and in ensuring that the response aligns with established cybersecurity best practices and potential criminal statutes. Careful judgment is required to avoid misclassification, which could lead to ineffective countermeasures, missed evidence, or even legal repercussions for improper handling of a digital incident. The correct approach involves a thorough, evidence-based analysis of the incident's characteristics to accurately categorize the cybercrime. This means meticulously examining the methods used, the intent of the perpetrator, and the nature of the compromised data. For instance, if an individual gains unauthorized access to a computer system by exploiting a known vulnerability without permission, this aligns with the definition of hacking under Alabama law. The justification for this approach is rooted in the principle of due process and the need for precise legal classification to initiate appropriate investigative actions, which may include reporting to law enforcement agencies like the Alabama Law Enforcement Agency, ALEA, or the relevant district attorney's office, and adhering to any notification requirements under Alabama's data breach laws, such as the Alabama Computer Crimes Act. An incorrect approach would be to assume the nature of the cybercrime based on superficial observations without gathering sufficient digital evidence. For example, if an employee reports receiving suspicious emails asking for personal information, immediately labeling it as phishing without investigating the sender's origin, the content's deceptive nature, or whether any credentials were actually compromised, is a failure. This overlooks the possibility of other forms of social engineering, or even a precursor to a more sophisticated attack. Such a hasty classification could lead to inadequate security measures being implemented, failing to address the root cause, and potentially violating ethical obligations to thoroughly investigate and protect the affected systems and data according to Alabama's cybersecurity standards. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the immediate disruption caused by the incident without considering the underlying criminal activity. If a company's website is defaced, attributing it solely to vandalism, without investigating whether the defacement was a byproduct of unauthorized access or data exfiltration, would be a significant oversight. This neglects the potential for more serious criminal intent and the need to gather evidence for prosecution under Alabama's cybercrime statutes, such as those prohibiting unauthorized access to computer systems or the transmission of malicious code. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to implement a generic, one-size-fits-all response to any digital incident without considering the specific type of cybercrime. For example, applying the same incident response protocols for a denial-of-service attack as for a ransomware attack would be ineffective. Each type of cybercrime requires tailored investigative and remediation strategies, and failing to differentiate can lead to wasted resources, prolonged system downtime, and increased vulnerability to future attacks, potentially contravening professional cybersecurity standards and Alabama's legal expectations for due diligence. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured incident response plan that prioritizes evidence preservation, accurate classification of the incident based on established definitions and legal statutes in Alabama, and a phased approach to containment, eradication, and recovery. This process should include consulting with legal counsel specializing in Alabama cyberlaw and coordinating with relevant law enforcement agencies when criminal activity is suspected. Question 18. Examination of the data shows that a cybersecurity incident has occurred at an Alabama-based e-commerce company, potentially exposing the personal information of thousands of its customers. The company's IT department is working to contain the breach and restore systems, but the full extent of the compromise and the specific types of data affected are not yet definitively known. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the company to ensure compliance with Alabama's data breach notification laws? Option A. Notify only those customers whose personal information is definitively confirmed to have been misused, as this avoids unnecessary alarm and potential liability for information that may not have been accessed. Option B. Proceed with notifying all affected customers immediately using a generic notification template, without consulting legal counsel, to ensure timely compliance with notification deadlines. Option C. Wait until the IT department has fully contained the breach and completed all technical remediation before initiating any customer notifications, as this will ensure the integrity of the information provided. Option D. Immediately begin an internal investigation to determine the scope and nature of the breach, identify compromised personal information, assess risk of harm, and consult with legal counsel specializing in Alabama data privacy law to guide notification procedures. Correct answer is D. Immediately begin an internal investigation to determine the scope and nature of the breach, identify compromised personal information, assess risk of harm, and consult with legal counsel specializing in Alabama data privacy law to guide notification procedures. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common yet critical challenge for businesses operating in Alabama, responding effectively and compliantly to a data breach. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need for swift action to mitigate harm with the legal obligations imposed by Alabama's data breach notification laws. Missteps can lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. The urgency of the situation, coupled with the potential for incomplete information, demands careful judgment and adherence to established legal frameworks. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves immediately initiating an internal investigation to determine the scope and nature of the breach, identifying the types of personal information compromised, and assessing the risk of harm to affected individuals. Simultaneously, the company must consult with legal counsel specializing in Alabama data privacy law to ensure all notification requirements under the Alabama Computer Breach Protection Act are met. This includes understanding the specific triggers for notification, the content of the required notices, the deadlines for providing them, and the designated recipients of such notices, e.g., affected individuals, the Alabama Attorney General. This proactive, legally guided approach prioritizes compliance and minimizes potential liabilities by ensuring all statutory obligations are addressed accurately and promptly. Incorrect approach is analysis. Delaying notification until all technical remediation is complete without first assessing the legal requirements for interim or immediate notification is a significant regulatory failure. Alabama law, like many state statutes, imposes specific timeframes for notification that may not align with internal IT remediation schedules. This approach risks violating the Act's notification deadlines. Another unacceptable approach is to only notify individuals whose data was demonstrably misused, rather than all individuals whose personal information was accessed or acquired, as defined by the Act. The Alabama Computer Breach Protection Act generally requires notification if unencrypted personal information was accessed or acquired, regardless of whether misuse is confirmed. This narrow interpretation can lead to noncompliance. Finally, attempting to handle the notification process without consulting legal counsel experienced in Alabama data breach laws is highly problematic. This can result in overlooking crucial notification requirements, using inadequate notice content, or failing to notify the appropriate state authorities, all of which constitute regulatory failures and expose the company to significant legal repercussions. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing a data breach in Alabama should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes immediate assessment and legal consultation. First step is to contain and investigate the breach to understand its scope and the types of data involved. Concurrently, engage legal counsel to interpret Alabama's specific data breach notification laws and guide the subsequent actions. This ensures that all notification obligations are understood and met within the statutory timelines. Documenting all steps taken throughout the process is also crucial for demonstrating due diligence and compliance. Question 19. Upon reviewing the potential for expanding their artisanal soap business into Alabama, a business owner is considering how to best market a new line of products online. The owner wants to emphasize the all-natural and handcrafted aspects of these soaps. What is the most prudent approach to ensure compliance with Alabama's consumer protection laws regarding online transactions? Option A. Focus on the aesthetic appeal of the soaps in online advertisements, with minimal emphasis on detailed product information, assuming that interested Alabama consumers will seek out specific details if they are truly concerned. Option B. Disclose ingredient lists and manufacturing details only upon direct consumer request, and bury the return policy in a lengthy, difficult-to-navigate terms and conditions document on the website. Option C. Develop marketing materials that clearly and conspicuously state the ingredients, any potential allergens, and the actual manufacturing process, ensuring that claims like all natural and handcrafted are accurate and verifiable, and provide easily accessible contact information and a clear return policy for Alabama consumers. Option D. Utilize broad, aspirational marketing language such as revolutionary formula and clinically proven results to generate excitement, assuming consumers understand that such claims are for promotional purposes and not literal representations. The correct answer is C. Develop marketing materials that clearly and conspicuously state the ingredients, any potential allergens, and the actual manufacturing process, ensuring that claims like all natural and handcrafted are accurate and verifiable, and provide easily accessible contact information and a clear return policy for Alabama consumers. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the desire to expand a business's reach through online sales with the stringent consumer protection laws in Alabama, specifically concerning deceptive trade practices and unfair competition in e-commerce. A business owner must navigate the complexities of online advertising, disclosure requirements, and the potential for misrepresentation to avoid legal repercussions and maintain consumer trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure all online representations are accurate, transparent, and comply with Alabama law. The best professional approach involves proactively ensuring all online advertisements and product descriptions for the new line of artisanal soaps are truthful, specific, and clearly disclose all material information, including ingredients, potential allergens, and manufacturing processes, in a manner easily accessible to Alabama consumers. This includes verifying that any claims about all natural or organic ingredients are substantiated and accurately reflect the product's composition, thereby adhering to Alabama's Deceptive Trade Practices Act, DTPA, which prohibits misleading advertising. Furthermore, providing clear contact information and a straightforward return policy for Alabama customers demonstrates a commitment to fair dealing and consumer rights. An approach that relies on vague or aspirational marketing language without concrete substantiation for claims like revolutionary formula or clinically proven results for a cosmetic product is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the Alabama DTPA requirement for truthful and non-misleading representations, potentially exposing the business to claims of deceptive advertising. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to omit or obscure important details about the product's origin or manufacturing process, such as failing to disclose that the artisanal soaps are mass-produced in a factory rather than handcrafted, or not clearly listing all ingredients, especially common allergens. This lack of transparency can be construed as an unfair or deceptive trade practice under Alabama law, as it prevents consumers from making informed purchasing decisions. Finally, an approach that prioritizes sales volume over consumer clarity by burying essential information, such as ingredient lists or allergen warnings, in hard-to-find links or small print, is also professionally unacceptable. Alabama consumer protection laws emphasize the importance of clear and conspicuous disclosures, and such tactics undermine this principle, potentially leading to consumer harm and legal action. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, accuracy, and compliance with specific state regulations. This involves conducting thorough due diligence on all marketing claims, ensuring all disclosures are prominent and understandable, and establishing clear communication channel with consumers. A proactive approach to understanding and adhering to Alabama's consumer protection statutes, particularly the DTPA, is crucial for mitigating risk and fostering a trustworthy online marketplace. Question 20. When evaluating the legal aspects of e-commerce for a business selling custom-designed digital artwork online to customers located in Alabama, and the business had $280,000 in gross receipts from sales to Alabama customers in the preceding calendar year, and 250 separate transactions to Alabama customers in the preceding calendar year. What is the most accurate method for calculating the total sales tax liability for the current calendar year, assuming the Alabama state sales tax rate is 4%, and the average combined state and local sales tax rate for the relevant Alabama jurisdictions where customers are located is 9%? Option A. Assume digital artwork is not taxable in Alabama, and therefore no sales tax needs to be collected or remitted. Option B. Calculate the total tax due by multiplying the total taxable gross receipts from sales to Alabama customers by the state sales tax rate of 4% and disregard local taxes. Option C. Calculate the total tax due by multiplying the total taxable gross receipts from sales to Alabama customers by the combined state and local sales tax rate of 9%. Option D. Calculate tax only on sales exceeding $250,000 in gross receipts and only apply the state sales tax rate of 4%. The correct answer is C. Calculate the total tax due by multiplying the total taxable gross receipts from sales to Alabama customers by the combined state and local sales tax rate of 9%. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the need to accurately calculate and remit sales tax in Alabama, a state with specific e-commerce nexus rules and varying local tax rates. Miscalculation can lead to significant financial penalties, interest, and damage to the business's reputation. The complexity arises from Alabama's economic nexus thresholds and the potential for differing taxability of digital goods and services across various Alabama counties and municipalities. The best approach involves a precise calculation of the total gross receipts from sales to Alabama customers that exceed the state's economic nexus threshold, and then applying the correct state and local sales tax rates. This requires understanding Alabama's specific economic nexus rules, which are based on gross receipts or the number of transactions. For instance, if a business has gross receipts exceeding $250,000 from sales into Alabama in the preceding calendar year, or has 200 or more separate transactions into Alabama in the preceding calendar year, it establishes economic nexus. Once nexus is established, the business must register with the Alabama Department of Revenue and collect and remit sales tax on all taxable sales into the state. The calculation must account for the Alabama state sales tax rate, plus any applicable county and municipal sales taxes, which can vary significantly. The formula for the total tax due would be: total tax due equals total taxable gross receipts in Alabama, asterisk, 1 plus state sales tax rate plus applicable local sales tax rates. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to Alabama's economic nexus laws and its sales tax collection and remittance requirements for remote sellers. It ensures compliance by accurately identifying when nexus is triggered and then correctly calculating the tax liability based on all applicable rates. An incorrect approach would be to only consider the state sales tax rate and ignore local taxes. This fails to comply with Alabama's integrated state and local sales tax system, where local taxes are collected and remitted through the state. The business would underremit taxes, leading to penalties and interest on the uncollected local portions. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that digital goods are not taxable in Alabama without verifying the specific Alabama Department of Revenue guidance on the taxability of such items. Alabama law can be nuanced regarding digital goods and services, and failing to research this specific aspect could result in noncompliance. A further incorrect approach would be to calculate tax based on the customer's shipping address without first determining if economic nexus has been established. This might lead to collecting and remitting taxes when not legally required, or conversely, failing to collect when nexus is present, but the calculation method is flawed. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of Alabama's economic nexus laws, including both gross receipts and transaction thresholds. This should be followed by an analysis of the taxability of the specific goods or services being sold within Alabama. Once nexus is confirmed, the business must identify all applicable state, county, and municipal sales tax rates for the relevant Alabama jurisdiction. Finally, a robust system for tracking sales and calculating tax liabilities accurately, incorporating all these factors, is essential for ongoing compliance.